Hear ye, board is in session. Honorable Judge Conkle presiding.
Right now, I'm not going to be playing a judge for a couple of minutes here. Are we on?
Yep, you're on.
Okay. I'm Richard Conkle. I'm president of the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Should be an interesting program. Do we have any first-time visitors? Oh, we do. And your name?
Jean Woods,
And are you from York, or where are you from?
Waynesboro.
Oh, Waynesboro? Okay. Well, we're very glad to have you. And,
Thank you.
have you been here before, sir? Okay. Well, we're glad to have everyone here today. So at this time, if we have our secretary, we'll have minutes from the last meeting.
March's general meeting took place the 6th of March 2022 at the York History Center. 33 people attended in person. The program was also live streamed. February's meeting minutes were read and accepted. The treasurer's report was a balance of $17,341.69 at the end of February. Membership report was 151 members, including family memberships, with 6 of those being new this year. Nicole Smith provided an overview of upcoming York History Center programs. All programs are recorded and available online. That day's program was also live streamed. Vice President Jonathan Stayer provided information on our upcoming programs, noting that the location for April's program, the challenges facing the Continental Congress in Yorktown, is the Colonial Complex here in York. The program that day was Brad Aming, talking on 18th century gunsmithing in Eastern Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Jerry. Any additions or corrections? Hearing none, those minutes will be approved as read. This time, our treasurer, Margaret Burke, will give us the treasurer's report.
The bank balance at March 1st, 2022, $17,355.98. Receipts for the month of March, membership renewal $50 and new member $25, for a total of $75. Disbursements, program speaker for March was Brad Emig, and that was $125. Becky Ann signed miscellaneous mailings, publications, $52.72, and printer stat for the digitization of publications numbers 1 through 86 and the parish telephone, $1,043.27. Total disbursements for March, $1,220.99, leaving the balance at March 31st, $16,209.99. Membership still sits at 151.
Thank you, Margaret. At this time, we will have Nicole Smith from the York County History Center give us information about the news, the library archives.
Thank you, everyone. So glad to see you all today. And thanks for those watching at home. If you are watching at home and you have any questions during the program, please type them in the chat or comments on Facebook. This program is being recorded and will be available on the York County History Center YouTube channel. A couple upcoming events. Our second Saturday in April will be Ruth Ann Robinson, who will be speaking about the Welsh slate industry in York County. The Civil War Roundtable, April 20th, will be Scott Mingus speaking on the Lincoln Funeral Train in Pennsylvania, his new book. And Sunday, April 24th, the Friends of the York County History Center will have their spring brunch at the York County Country Club. So for more information on any of our programs or to register, please visit yorkhistorycenter.org. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. This time I'll ask our Vice President, Jonathan Stayer, to give us information about upcoming meetings, which we have just a few, and also to introduce today's program.
Thank you, Richard. Next month, the month of May, we'll be having Tyler Stump from the State Archives, who will be speaking about state hospital records, the history of the institutions, as well as what records are available. So if you have ancestors who were at state hospitals, you may want to come and find out the latest information on how to access those records. They are accessible and they contain lots of helpful and valuable information. Since I'm also working with those, if you have any questions, I might be able to help Tyler a couple times because I deal with them as a volunteer processing those records. In June, we will be having our Henry James Young Award program, and we will be honoring those recipients who have received that award. Today's program is being presented by our own board member, Tom Gibson. Now, most of you probably know Tom from one of his many hats that he wears, including I always associate him with the Colonial Complex here, particularly Colonial Courthouse. If you come here for a tour or a special program, usually Tom's involved with that. He is a retired staff member and administrator from York College, but he has been volunteering with the York, well, it's not York County History Center, for about 50 years. He's also heavily involved with the Boy Scouts, Sons of the American Revolution. He's been a presenter at Ollie, and so he has quite a background. So at this time, Tom and his friends are going to present to us the challenges of Continental Congress in Yorktown.
Hear ye, welcome all to the York County History Center Colonial Courthouse. How do we know what happened 5 years ago? Any volunteers, any of you out there, suggestions? How do we know what happened? What records were kept from 245 years ago? We have church records. We have letters. And I want to express my appreciation to John and Jackie Donnell, who are going to be reading some of the letters between John and Abigail Adams. What is particularly interesting between these letters between John and Abigail was that they both used a code so that they could send secret messages back and forth between them. Jackie's going to be reading one of Abigail's letters that has a coded sentence. Many of the codes we have still been unable to decipher today. It was truly amazing the skill these two people had as they wrote back and forth with each other. I'd also like to thank Richard Koppel, who has agreed to be our judge. And one of the ways that we found out what happened was through court records. We still have the original 1770s court records up in the old city hall. They're up in the attic. They are incredibly musty. It's truly amazing and fun to go through all of that information. Some of them have been taken out to the archives at the York County Center, but there were so many of them that a lot of them are just still sitting upstairs in boxes, and I've seen them up there. It's really cool to have all this stuff still saving. And York has been fortunate in that, unlike many others, we have not had any experiences of fires that have damaged some of these old records. Yes, yeah, Christian, yeah, thank you. So this was the courthouse. Before the Continental Congress came in here, we were meeting in Philadelphia. It was not a good time for the Continental Congress for our fledgling country. We had a flag. As a matter of fact, in the back of the room right here is a very good example of the original flag. My apologies to those of you from Philadelphia, especially if any of you are descendants of Betsy Ross, but Betsy Ross did not design the American flag. It was ratified by the Continental Congress when they were meeting in Philadelphia. They had specific specifications as to what the flag would look like, but the circle of the stars was not part of the original. I have been to the Betsy Ross house many times. Many of you might have also. I hate to say this, that's not her house. Her house was unfortunately torn down. It was the house next door. And if you ask one of the people that are showing you around the Betsy Ross house and you say, which was her bedroom? And they are going to very delicately and politely say, oh, well, she slept in this room, which was true. Her husband was having a party. It was running late. She was tired. She had a headache. She went next door to the neighbors and went upstairs and slept in that particular room. It was a guest room, and that's the room where they tell you this is where she slept for one night. When you go out back, there's a cenotaph. Those are not her bones in there. If you ask them, they will talk about it. They are probably that of a servant on the property, but we don't really know for sure, except that they are not hers. So there is a very good representation of a flag. We've examined that very carefully, and we've tried to decide whether that flag is original. There is a possibility that the blue field could be original. We are almost certain that the stripes are not, because if you look, you will see some machine stitching in that flag. The sewing machine was invented by Elias Howe in the 1830s, I believe it was 1838. So obviously that could not be, but if you examine it real closely, you do see some stitching that could be reminiscent of hand stitching even before that. But almost certainly the stripes are not original, but the blue and the stars could be. So what happened here in York years ago? Soon after William Penn made his treaty with the Indians at Philadelphia in 1682, under the famous elm tree, he laid off the eastern part of his province into 3 counties. A treaty was made on January 15th, 1696, with the 5 nations, Native American nations, for all of the tract of land lying on both sides of the Susquehanna. The treaty was confirmed by the Susquehannock Indians on September 18th of 1700, and a deed given by the 2 chiefs of that tribe. But the Conestoga Indians, a small tribe located along the river a few miles south of the present site of Columbia, claimed that the Indians mentioned above, they have no right to make a treaty conveying this land to the Penn family. In 1722, 4 years after the death of William Penn, Sir William Keith, the governor of the province of Pennsylvania, talked with the chiefs of the Conestoga Indians and obtained permission to survey a tract of 2,000 acres west of the Susquehanna, from the town of Wrightsville to the mouth of the Codorus. This was named the Newberry Tract, which believed to have had rich mineral deposits. The same year, after another council with the Conestogas, he obtained permission of them to survey 64,000 acres of land on the west side of the river to prevent the encroachment of Maryland squatters who were already in the Hanover area and moving quickly up into York County. This vast area was named Springettsbury Manor in honor of Springett's Penn, the eldest grandson of William Penn. It included the present counties of Dauphin, Lebanon, Cumberland, York, and Adams, without any well-defined western or northern boundaries. Between the years of 1733 and 36, agents of Penn at Wrights Ferry granted permits for settlers to locate in this Springettsbury Manor on the Newberry Tract. The deed stated, the red men of the forest grant to John Thomas and Richard Penn all the river Susquehanna and all the lands on the west side of said river to the setting of the sun. After the treaty was confirmed in Philadelphia, the fertile lands were rapidly settled, and in August of 1749, the county of York, which at that time also included Adams County, were organized as the 5th and 6th counties of Penn's princely domain. Many of our ancestors came on what was known as the Monocacy Trail. That's Market Street. Remember, this building is a reconstruction. This building was actually located in the center of town, right on the square. Years ago, you could actually, they had an outline of the building. The foundation of this building, the original, is still down under the square. Even through all of the trolley cars in the center of town, the foundation is still there. And if you go down, if you have the opportunity, which doesn't happen very often, you can go down in the restrooms underground, and the far back western wall of those restrooms is actually the foundation wall of the original York County Courthouse. Our ancestors came across the Monocacy Trail right here on through what's now Market Street, and then down to Hanover. From Hanover, they continued on down to the Monocacy River, which empties into the Potomac River. My ancestors walked across the Monocacy Trail on their way to southern Maryland and northern Virginia on the Monocacy Trail. One of my ancestors decided that he liked York County. And that was, I'm going to put a Gibson moment here. Anyhow, he got out into Doris Township, liked the area, and said, I think I'm going to settle here, and stayed in the area. It was Rubel. And they decided, I've asked a couple of you on one occasion too to investigate. I still haven't found where he's buried, but he's somewhere out in the Doris Township. Another thing that was interesting is that William Penn put together what he called the Penn Charter of Liberties. This was on April 25th of 1682. And William Gibson, who was one of the ones who went from here to Northern Virginia, was one of the signers of Penn's Charter of Liberties on that 1862 date. And I have the original, does sit in the archive, but you can see his name here is the third one down on the list after Christopher Taylor and Charles Lloyd, and those names were under William Penn. He was one of the financial backers of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which is kind of neat having that family history part of all this community. Coming up the road from Wright's Ferry on one calm September afternoon in the eventful year of 1777 were these illustrious men who acted, whose acts and deeds during the dark period of the Revolution gave luster to the pages of American history. When the Continental Congress was meeting in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia was being overtaken by the British regulars, they needed a place to go. They thought they would come west, and they arrived at the town of Lancaster. Two things happened. One, they found that the Pennsylvania legislature was already there, because the Pennsylvania legislature came directly from Philadelphia, whereas the members of the Continental Congress took a circuitous route all the way up through Allentown and back down. They brought with them some of their prized documents. We have one here. We found this up in the attic. This is an original copy of the Declaration of Independence. Now, come on, you're supposed to laugh. Thank you. No, it's not an original. However, there is a neat story, because not too far west of here, out in East Berlin, somebody bought a picture for the frame for $50 and pulled it out, and sitting in the back side of that was an original copy of the Declaration of Independence. They thought, oh, this is a pretty good deal, sold it for, I believe, $50,000 And then that person went and ended up selling for $2 million. But they would carry their documents, especially their prize one, in sealed containers like this that would keep the paper from deteriorating and protect everything. So the congressman arrived after one day in Lancaster County. They decided we need to move on and put the Susquehanna River between us. Now, there was some protection in Lancaster County, but the Susquehanna River, particularly if we kept the ferry boats on the western side, so that if the British were to come, it would be very difficult for them to get huge armies across the Susquehanna River. And they came to York, and in this courthouse, they settled. They had some significant problems out here. Number one, most of our ancestors spoke German. About 90% of them did. There were some English speaking, but the newspapers, everything was in German. They also came into a somewhat hostile community. There were about 1,600 people living here. By the time the members of the Continental Congress came in, it became a very crowded community. All of us had to find a place to live. And the first letter I have is from John Adams, and he's writing to his wife, Abigail, and he is describing briefly what had happened.
October 25th, 1777. My best friend. This town is a small one, not larger than Plymouth. There are in it 2 German churches, the one Lutheran and the other one Calvinistical. The congregations are pretty numerous, and their attendance upon public worship is decent. It is remarkable that the Germans, wherever they are found, are careful to maintain public worship, which is more than can be said for the other denominations of Christians this way. There is one church here erected by the joint contributions of the Episcopalians and the Presbyterians, but the minister, who is a missionary, is confined to Toryism, so that they have had a long time with no public worship. Congress has appointed 2 chaplains, Mr. White and Mr. Dunfield, the former of whom is an Episcopalian, is arrived and opens Congress with prayers every day. The latter is expected every hour. Mr. Deutsch, I am sorry to inform you, has turned out to be an apostate and a traitor. Poor man. I am wearied with the life I led and long for the joys of my family. God grant that I may enjoy it in peace. Peace is my dear delight. War has no charms for me. If I live much longer in banishment, I shall scarcely know my own children. Tell the little ones that if they are very good, Papa will come home.
John Adams, very poignant letters to Abigail. Of the delegates to the Continental Congress during the entire period of the Revolution, none were more zealous in legislation for the prosecution of the war than his cousin Samuel Adams in Massachusetts. He was a man of lofty patriotism and unbounded energy. The English government blamed John Hancock and Samuel Adams more than any other for the origin of the war. and a reward of $25,000, the equivalent of well over $1 million today, was offered for the capture of either of them. If they were captured, they would be denied pardon for their allegation treason to their mother country. With Adams as the leader of Congress while in York, the struggle for liberty was simply a matter of life or death. Success in establishing freedom would send him down to posterity, honored by all future generations. Failure pointed to the prison cell. Everything seemed dark and gloomy during these early days of October 1777, and some of the members of Congress were almost ready to give up their struggle. John and Abigail, as they sent letters back and forth, almost half of their letters were intercepted by the British. They knew this. They knew their letters were being intercepted. Also, it took anywhere from a month, in some cases to as much as 3 months, for a letter to get from Massachusetts all the way down here to York. So Abigail, unable to communicate with her husband, is writing almost in a desperation, trying to get and find out what is happening. But she also knows what's happening in the rest of the country. She's getting information that John was not able to get down here. So because of that, she's trying to give him some information.
November 16th, 1777, my dearest friend, in a letter which came to me tonight, you chide yourself for neglecting writing so frequently as you had done. 'Tis true, a very long space of near a fortnight passed without me hearing one word from you. I cannot help feeling anxious when such a space elapses without receiving a line. But I have no reason to complain. You have, considering your avocations, been more attentive than I had reason to expect. Having short out letters for some wretched said, some banished lover, or some captive maid. I know you will be mortified because it has been a favorite object with you. But if you want your arms crowd with victory, you should not appoint what General Gates calls dreaming deacons to conduct them. General Burgoyne and his troops arrived last week in Cambridge. All seems to be quietness at present. From the southward, we get no very authentic accounts. Today, Howe and his whole army are captives.
John, still unable to hear some of the writings, or to read the writings of his wife, was becoming very frustrated. As a matter of fact, shortly after he wrote this letter, he decided that he was not going to stay in York and was going to leave. And he is particularly critical of the community of York. John Adams writes,
October 28th, 1776. My dearest friend, we have been 3 days soaking and poaching the heaviest rain that has been known for several years. And what adds to the gloom and uncertainty which we remain at this moment concerning the fate of Gates and Burgoyne. We are out of patience. It is impossible to bear the suspense with any temper. I am in comfortable lodgings, which is a felicity that has fallen to the lot of a very few of our members. Yet the house where I am is so thronged that I cannot enjoy such accommodations as I wish. I cannot have a room as I used, and therefore cannot find the opportunity to write as I once did. The people of the country are chiefly German, who have schools in their own language, as well as prayers, psalms, and sermons. And the multitudes are born, grown up, and die here, without ever learning the English. The politics they have are bred of mongrels or neutrals and benumbed with general torpor.
Mongrels. He called us mongrels. Abigail still has not heard, but she does have some information. In the second paragraph of this letter is an encoded message. Abigail writes to John.
November 18th, 1777. No news at all. My mountebank story of captivating Hal and his army is coming to nothing. The Southern troops must have some assistance from the Northern before anything very brilliant will take place. Providence overrules all things for the best and will work out our salvation for us in the wisest and best manner, provided we perform our duty. My brother has had the misfortune to be taken upon his return from a cruise up the Baltic. They had a valuable prize with them loaded with duck and cordage. He was captain of Marines on board the Tartar Captain Grimes' Master and was carried into Newfoundland, since which we have not heard from him. Now, my dear friends, shall I ask you when you will return? A question I have not asked you for these 10 months. Knowing your determination when you left me, I have summoned patience and endeavored to submit to my destiny. By the time this reaches you, 11 months will be lapsed, and you, I hope, preparing for your journey. It will be a tedious one, I fear, in the depths of winter. But let the thought of the cordial reception you will be assured of meeting warm the cold wintry blasts and make your return joyful. You make no mention of receiving any letters from me for a long time. I hope none have miscarried. I must beg you would write whilst you continue absent. We have had very great rains this fall and severe cold weather for the season. A flight of snow yesterday, and today as cold as January. Adieu to yours.
Truly, two best friends. The Adams and also the current president of the Continental Congress had had enough. They wanted to leave. York was not the place for them. They needed to find a president. John's cousin, Samuel Adams, knowing that they wanted to communicate with the South, decided that he had to nominate someone from the South. And after some discussion with his cousin and with the current president, they decided to nominate Henry Lawrence from South Carolina. Now, a lot of the information that I'm presenting comes from that book, the Colonial Courthouse, and this is Continental Congress Courageous, which was started by Judge John Rawhauser. I had so many great times with him in this building 30 and 40 years ago. The man just truly loved history without question. And he was always down here when he had free time, just trying to let people know what happened in this building. And one of his stories I think is particularly interesting. And this is the story of Henry Lawrence. Henry Lawrence was from the South. When the Congress came in, there wasn't really enough room for all of them. Some of the tables had to be set up outside the bar. But the states from the north sat on the north side, and the states from the south were over here on the south side. And South Carolina and Georgia were all the way back here. So Henry Lawrence was up against an outside wall. It was cold. The only heat for the building was this stove right here in the middle. Samuel Adams stands up and says, I nominate Henry Lawrence to be the next president of the Continental Congress. Unanimously, they all agreed, but they weren't sure if he would accept. Nobody wanted to dedicate their sacred lives, their honor, and their life, and all of their money and funds and property for this fledgling country. But Henry Lawrence did. Henry Lawrence had gout. He had to walk with a cane. Henry Lawrence accepted the presidency, supposedly, so that he could sit at the front table, lift the green cloth, and put his feet near the stove so that his feet could be warm. Your Honor, thank you for your service to the country. Henry Lawrence, by many, has been accepted as the first president of the United States. And the reason for that is that he was president when the Articles of Confederation were adopted right here in York County. Most of us think John Hancock was the first president because we became a country on July 4th, 1776, when our country was founded in Philadelphia. But we were just really a loose confederation at the time. We were states. It wasn't until the Articles of Confederation were adopted, and we do have an original copy here at the History Center too. When the Articles of Confederation were adopted right here in York, we became united, and therefore the United States of America. President Lawrence appointed Richard Henry Lee of Virginia, Samuel Adams of Massachusetts, to a committee of Congress to draft a national proclamation of Thanksgiving, the first in the history of our American Republic. This historic document was written by the eminent Virginian Richard Henry Lee, who less than 2 years before had moved in Congress at Philadelphia that these United States are and of right ought to be free and independent states, and himself became one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. The proclamation is remarkable in language and thought. Besides breathing forth a spirit of lofty patriotism, it also contains a deep and fervent religious sentiment. The proclamation was adopted by Congress on October 30th, and 2 days later, the President of Congress wrote the following letter to each of the governors of the 13 states then in the Union. Would you be willing to read that? Or I hate to drop something on you here, but that part right there. But can you see the camera?
York, in Pennsylvania, November the 1st, 1777. Sir, the arms of the United States of America having been blessed in the present campaign with remarkable success, Congress has resolved to recommend that Thursday, December 18th next be set apart to be observed by all inhabitants throughout the United States for a general thanksgiving to Almighty God. And I hereby transmit to you the enclosed extract from the minute of Congress for that purpose. Your Excellency will be pleased to take the necessary measures for carrying this resolve into effect in the state in which you reside. You will likewise find enclosed certified copy of the minutes, which will show your Excellency the authority under which I have the honor of addressing you. I am with great esteem and regard, sir, your Excellency's most obedient and humble servant, Henry Lawrence, President of Congress.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your next duty is going to be to swear in United States citizens. The members of Congress were very concerned that many of you might be loyalists. And in fact, many of you were. The problem was, particularly those in the clergy who had taken an oath to the King of England, could not go against that oath. So what I'm going to do now is have all of you please stand, raise your right hand, and you are going to be United States citizens sworn in at the sound of the gavel. Repeat after me. I do acknowledge the United States of America to be independent and sovereign states, and declare that the people thereof owe no allegiance or obedience to George III, King of England. I renounce, refuse, and abjure any allegiance or obedience to him. I do swear or affirm that I will, to the utmost of my power, support, maintain, and defend the United States against said King, George III, and his heirs and their abettors, assistants and adherents, and will serve the United States in the office of which I now hold fidelity, according to the best of my skills and understanding. So help me God. You are now United States citizens, and you all receive funds for joining up with us. There's yours right there. There you are, welcome, and you all may be seated.
Now we have to pay this back with income tax.
Well, I have bad news for you. It says $40 on there, but the problem is there is terrible inflation during colonial times. And because of that, that $40 is probably only going to be worth about 40 cents in the next year or so. Our ancestors took advantage of that, and when the members of the Congress paid with Continental script, they insisted on gold and silver or something of value. We were really a barter community here. We bartered almost everything. Money was rare. So when these guys came in with their paper money, our ancestors didn't want it. Let's see what I'm doing over time here. Let's do Lafayette. This entire program, and my apologies to those of you who have been at this course before over at Penn State in the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. It's an adult learning at Penn State, because about half of everything that I've done here came from that program. The one that's I really enjoy, and it's especially if you get a chance to go over to the Gates house and be up in the room where most likely the Board of War was meeting, and the President of Congress invited the Marquis de Lafayette. The Marquis was a very good friend of Washington. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. I don't know how many of you are aware of this or not, but many of the founders of this country were Masons. And both George Washington and Lafayette were brother Masons. And Lafayette adored George Washington. I mean, truly, he named his first son George Washington Lafayette. Because of that, and because of that closeness, when Lafayette was standing in that board of war and hearing everybody praising General Gates, and I don't want to knock what General Gates did because the man was very good, but he had some generals working for him, including Benedict Arnold, who really knew what they were doing. And Benedict Arnold, he was an incredible soldier. He could read the enemy and knew how to get information and how to spy. And in some cases, he might rightfully have been upset for some of the things that the Continental Congress and some of the Army did. But at this meeting, where everybody was praising General Gates and nobody was saying anything about George Washington, Lafayette became upset. And as he was there, this is what he said. If you want to try this with a French voice, or am I going to do it?
Oh, go for it.
All right. My French is terrible. I apologize. I have listened to all of the toasts with eager interest, and I appreciate the compliments showered upon me. But there is one toast entirely forgotten. And now let us all drink to the health of General Washington. He had them all standing. He had his glass up. He thought it was going to be another toast to General Gates. George Washington, the head of the American Army, may he bring this war of independence to the successful conclusion and live long as the greatest of all Americans. There's nothing definitely known of the effects of this toast upon the enemy, except a small reference made by Lafayette in his memoirs, published 37 years later. In that he says, after I had offered this toast, I looked around the table and saw the faces of the opponents of Washington redden with shame. Some of them put the cup to their lips and barely tasted the wine, while others were entirely confused. With a shrug of the shoulders and a hasty goodbye, he left the room and thus ended the Conway cabal to dispose of Washington and put General Gates in command. And that happened right here in York. France and America formed an alliance. If it hadn't been for the French supporting us, we would probably be a group of countries today in the New World, the same as Europe is. And most likely, this area, because we were significant German speakers, would probably be German speaking. This would be a new Germany or something like that. But because of Benjamin Franklin negotiating with France and the support of General Lafayette, stating that each would consider the other a most favorable nation for trade and friendship, France would be obliged to fight for American independence, and America would be obliged to stand by France if war should occur between France and Great Britain. Within 4 months, France and Great Britain were at war, and just a few years later, we became an independent country. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for being here. I'm very appreciative, and I also want to express my appreciation to those who helped out. Thanks so much. We can do some quick questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Obviously, like, you are a runner.
No, you're good.
Okay. Obviously, like John Rawhauser, I thoroughly enjoy the history of the Revolutionary period, and especially here in York County. And so if some of you have some questions, anything from, yeah, go ahead.
How would you characterize the court records that are still held here and not at the archives and courthouse? What courts, what kinds of records
Basically stuff that they felt wasn't worth saving. Or moving to an area that should be saved. I did hear that some of the archives were also moved over to the archive, the York County archives, where they could be protected in a better environment. But some of them were also deteriorated, and when I was up there, now that was 30 years ago, they were not in good condition, and they were just court records. I mean,
Yeah, but you know, case file records and things like that, I sometimes use in my work. So these, you know, innocuous trifold papers from hundreds of years ago can be, you know, valuable if they're the right kinds of things.
I don't think many original papers have survived hardly any. I think though pretty much all the docket books for the courts of quarter sessions and court of common pleas have survived. So you get references to, and some of them were actually published by us years ago, abstracts. But you basically get just a little more.
Yeah, I know the docket books are out of the archive, but when you look through
Original
like
papers.
they're indexed to quarter sessions, the original case papers are very few for that time period. And this leaves me wondering if that's what's up there.
I believe there aren't any
yeah,
original papers.
and what is there is probably not, at the time, they deemed that it was not worth transporting because it was either deteriorated or just not useful by the court records. Yep, anybody else? Anything from
No,
online?
nothing online. Everybody's-
All right, with that, I guess we'll finish up. Thank you all for being here. I'm very appreciative. And thank all of you watching online and those of you who might be watching 100 years from now. Who knows? I salute you and tip my hat. Thank you all. Yep, sure.
Thank you, Tom.